He's a very talented man, not just in broadcasting, but in everything he's ever tried. Today, we have him for a full show. That's next on Perspectives. Well, he's one of the most talented men I've ever known, and you never know where his microphone's going to take him, but the results are always the same, history-making. But first, I want to show you a couple of pictures. Take a look at this young guy. See if you can decide which one of these two is our guest today. South Dakota?
North Dakota.
North Dakota. Next picture. And now here we go. I want my boy to have a Grand Forks Herald route. So you were headed for newspaper first. Next picture. And there he is. Remember those days, folks, when they really came to the front and tossed it on your doorstep? Take a look at the next picture. Here he is with his brother. Brother's name?
Brother's name is Luther.
Luther. And we still don't know which one he is. Let's try another picture. All right, there should be some giveaway there. Look at the eyes. Next picture. Now we're getting close. I had glasses like that. Next picture. There he is, John Erling. That's right, John is our guest today. Next picture. There he is. During a break, probably. Where's my coffee? I want a sandwich. Next picture. Oh, this is nice. And I think we got one more. This is how we all remember John from his days behind the microphone. And by the way, that RCA right in front of you, I'd love to have it. I mean, only if you want to give it away, John. Welcome.
But I used that back in the 40s.
I know that.
You know, when I was introducing, the traveling acts that came through whatever town I was in.
Good to have you here.
Thank you, Sam.
How did you get into broadcasting?
How did I get into broadcasting? I like to give credit to a man by the name of Chucky One. I was in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. I had graduated from high school, and I didn't know what I was going to do, and it was a church school, and so for those of us who didn't know what we wanted to do, we came back to Bible school. And I roomed with Chuck and a few other guys, and they were actually going on in a seminary. And I hadn't even thought much about radio, but Chuck would say when I start talking, John, he says, with that voice of yours, you ought to be in radio. He had been a former broadcaster himself. Oh, really? Yeah, you should be in radio.
About what year are we talking about?
1960. So, well, how do I do that? Well, there's a school in Minneapolis known as Brown Institute of Broadcasting. So I had that in my mind. I went home, and then for next fall, I went to the University of North Dakota. I didn't like what their broadcasting department was all about, and I probably didn't like school either, to be honest with you. So I decided I ought to take up what Chuck said and investigate Brown Institute. And so I went there, 9 months. Actually, I got out in 8 months because a station in my hometown, in Grand Forks, KILO, hired me. But I was really intent on being in religious radio and gospel broadcasting.
No kidding.
Yep. And I started with Northwestern College Radio out of Minneapolis, went to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, eventually to Minneapolis, and then to Fargo, North Dakota. And I was there with Northwestern College Radio for 5 years. Now, back in those days, we had tapes. And I might come on at 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then you'd play these tapes, 30 minutes long, 15 minutes long, you make a station break. Well, I got so that I would go downstairs in the basement, I'd lay down on this couch. And I had it pretty well timed when I needed to wake up and make at 13:30 of that quarter hour and make a station break. This is KFNW, Fargo, North Dakota. The temperature is 55 below zero, and the wind is gusting 75 miles an hour. And so one day, as I'm laying on that couch, As Oral Roberts used to say, God talked to him. The word came to me and said, John, are you going to lay here on this couch for the rest of your life? And I might have said audibly, no, I am not. And the next day I got up and went over from Fargo into Moorhead, Minnesota, KBOX, to apply for a commercial job. I got that. I was there 6 months, and then I went, or actually for shorter, I went to WDAY in Fargo, which was the mainline news station. And then that's how I got into that. Now, I grew up being Lowell Fretty, and Lowell Fretty doesn't really sound too cool on the radio, but my first two names are John Erling. And so I became John Erling as I went into commercial radio. And now you know the story of how I got into radio.
I need to point out something. There was a time when radio was king. And the days that we're hearing about here were toward the last quarter of that period when television was just starting to make an impact. The war World War II was over. But the guys with the good voices, the guys that could think, the guys that could report, went on to radio news and eventually television news. Why didn't you make the jump?
I was not interested in television at all. I was a radio guy, born to be radio, and radio to this day. I had an opportunity when I was in Omaha to do television, and I said, no, no, no. I could do many more things on radio than you could on television. This thing about sitting around and waiting and being on the air for 5 minutes, no, I did not. I had 4 hours of radio talk or playing music to myself. Never interested me television at all. I didn't consider that an advancement.
John, when I moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, toward the end of the 70s, early part of the 80s, first time I heard you, I said, this guy is classic. This is what radio was about. This is what it should be about if it's not. And I became hooked within a week.
Well, thank you.
And it was incredible the things that you came up with. You were beyond bright. Now, I'm blowing some serious smoke here, but you were beyond bright. One of the hooks that you had was, in your own little way of promoting the area, would have been skiing the mountains of Tulsa.
The Tulsa Mountains, right.
Yeah.
And so ask me the question, how did I come up with that?
How'd you come up with that, John?
And then the other question you can ask is, how did you get to Tulsa? I shouldn't be telling you how to do your job. You are the great interviewer. But the interesting story, I came from Fargo, North Dakota to Omaha, Nebraska, and I was fired at WOW. Johnny Carson had worked for that station. That's the station he left to go out to California. And one day I was telling a joke about Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and the story was this: Blue Cross and Blue Shield did not increase its rates simply because the executives were out of town, and it just slipped their minds. Well, the biggest advertiser in the station was Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they fired me. All right, so then...
Now you know why I didn't ask.
Right, and so, now I'm proud of that. When I came here, I told the story again, and I didn't get fired. So then I went to KOIL, which is a rock station. And that station was taken off the air because Don Burden, the owner, tried to influence legislation in Washington, D.C., and he parked a brand new Cadillac in the driveway of a senator, U.S. senator, with the keys in it, and they took his license away. So I'm looking for a job. So...
Wait a minute.
Yep.
You're looking for a job because he parked the car there?
No, they took the radio station away.
Oh, I see.
Took his license away.
Okay.
I'll never forget listening to it going dark, as we said, and that station, it was a major rock station. I really wasn't a rock guy, but I did the morning there for a while. So anyway, my program director, Sam Holman, said, I know some people down in Tulsa who, in Swanson Broadcasting, who are looking for a guy. And because of Sam, he put me on to Ron Blue and the company here, and that's how I came in 1976 in the fall.
The evolution of John Erling, though, really started before then, didn't it? This ability to conjure up images and send them through a small speaker must have started before those glory days of radio for you. Where did it begin, really begin?
For me?
For storytelling.
I don't know, I suppose I was influenced by a man by the Jimmy O'Neill. He was a broadcaster. He actually did Shindig, if you remember that television.
do.
And he was in his 20s in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, and he ended up in Omaha, Nebraska. And so he did mornings, I did afternoons. I learned a lot from him. I don't know. I can't really answer your question as to when it began. It's hard to know that, except that when I came here, then you alluded to the Tulsa Mountains. Well, we pick up on ideas and we steal from other people. Johnny Carson used to talk about that. He would pick up from Jack Benny and all these people and put it all together. Well, the Tulsa Mountains, how did that come about? There was a guy by the name of Dewey Berquist, did television in Fargo, North Dakota, WDAY-TV, and he one day talked about Mount Fargo. Well, North Dakota is so flat you can watch a dog run away for 2 weeks. And so everybody laughed about Mount Fargo. Right. Everybody laughed about Mount Fargo. And that was in my head. Brought it to Omaha, and I called the Council Bluffs Mountains. No, it didn't work. When I came here, I knew there was some hills. And at first, my first week, I talked about the Oklahoma Mountains, and it still didn't work. So I persevered. And one day I thought, this has to work. When I called them the Tulsa Mountains, then it all took off. And we had this friendly controversy about what is a mountain and what is not. Well, they're so high and they're so many feet high before you end. And so there were those who thought I was crazy, and there were those who knew I was just having a good time, and they would call and participated in it. So it was a great way for a new radio person to be introduced to the community, because even the weather people would say, well, the weather up in the Tulsa Mountains is going to be so, and it became organic and grew and grew and grew and grew. So,
And stayed evergreen for quite some time.
yes, and then we had the Tulsa Mountain truck driver who came through town, and he got so mad at me because his kids came down from Joplin to go skiing the Tulsa Mountains. And on a Saturday morning, they called and said, hey, where are the mountains? And off the air, I had to say to them, I'm sorry. They just started laughing. And when he came through, he just read me the riot act, thought it was crazy. We put that over the song, the Tulsa Mountain song. And so I still have people that talk about that, but there's more.
Oh, there's much more, and we're going to hear much more about it and what he's up to these days when we come back.